Summer 937. What Osrith did was to keep Sainid's land. Sowing and planting yielding good harvests, sheep yielded good milk, cheeses were made, people were happy, and Osrith waited until the time came that she could wait no more. And she thought that time was going to be when a single horse came south, approaching Osrith's hall at speed. "Tell me you are going to your father?" Osrith asked her son, who had accepted meat and cheese and bread and ale. He looked tired, more tired than a young person ought. "I will not lower myself to ask to visit," young Finan told her, as Koltigar greeted him warmly and refreshed his horse. "Bibbenberg is his, as he is so fond of telling me. Utad knows that if it had not been for me he would never have reclaimed it," Osrith told him. "And besides, I suspect young Utad needs you. I am glad you taught me toughness, mother," young Finan told his mother. For he was heading to Ofoik, to treat with Osferth, now in the service of Aethelstan in his role in the north as ambassador. So Constantine would send her son to a diplomatic meeting, Osrith mused. Perhaps it was Eswi's idea. Aethelstan would be nothing if not judicious, and would unlikely have young Finan run through. "Will you at least staying with your father?" Osrith asked of their son. Number. Young Finan shook his head, sadly. "He does not think me enough of a warrior. Hopefully, I will at least be of some use in discussions about peace." "He said that?" Osrith asked, shocked. "Once, to Utad one night. I overheard him. If I'm not as good a fighter as he was, I know that I must find a different path." "But you are good," Osrith told her son. "Your father's skill comes from the cunning bred into him from the brutality of his brother, the brutality of slavery. You are not like that, you can never be like that." "I would be like you," young Finan told her, fearless, bold. And he left, with a short embrace and his will to be like her, which was not a will Osrith wished for any person. He promised to take her love, and a letter to Edra when he went back to Dunnottar, and the last thing Osrith noticed was Fed a sword gleaming at his belt. Constantine with Owain and Anlaf Guthfrithson incurred south only a week later, and Osrith had heard from Bin that some of the farmholders had had to abandon their harvest. To the south, as if in answer, Aethelstan invaded north, again through Berwick, which could only have been done by Utad's consent. The first Osrith knew about it was a scream from Rhea and a hustling of her children to one of the cellars as warriors burst into her farm estate kitchen. Osrith recognized some of them, some from the Cayley in Dunnottar not 3 years before, wearing now not the mixture of West Saxon and Mercian livery, but that of Aethelstan, red with the gold dragon. "As you are here, you are welcome to my hospitality," Osrith told them, "as I also give hospitality to the men of Alba. This land is neutral, it is neither England nor Alba. And once you have supped, you are to leave, all of you are to leave," she added in Gaelish to the Alba warriors who had joined them. And she repeated the invitation in Cymric for any Picts and Strathclydians amongst the Alba warriors. That night, sharing her plan only with Koltigar, who was to ensure the neutrality was preserved and Berwick's lands continued with their peaceful cycle of the year, Osrith picked up her sword, took a horse and rode south, to Bibbenberg. 88,888,888 to Bibbenberg, where she Ken Utad, and his men, would not be. They would be with Aethelstan, wherever he was. Ofoik somewhere, probably. And it was young Finan whom he saw on the road, heading north, his horse riding for all it was worth. Behind her, in Glalan warriors. Probably those who had come to Berwick expecting an easy takeover. But then, young Finan turned, and rode back, at a more sedate pace. For, from the north, Alba warriors were coming. When she was to speak next to Constantine, as a broken king, resigned as he was to a life beside God, at Culdees, with Malcolm on the throne, she would recount that moment. She understood that Constantine had no choice and did not condemn his incursions south in those years between 934, when Aethelstan invaded, and 937 and the Great War. "Where did you go then?" Constantine asked Osrith, as she sat, holding his hand as he lay dying. They were bonded, they had always been bonded. And Finan stood beside her with the patience of the saint after whom he had been named, and listened as Osrith recounted that part of the story. "To my former home, to Bibbenberg. The gates were guarded by West Saxons. I did not believe it myself, but I went to the gates and I begged to see my brother, for whom I had fought to help him reclaim what is his. But the guards told me that the Lord of Bibbenberg said I was not welcome, even though I knew you'd not to be there. They guessed I had come to be your spy, of course, so I paid a farm boy to dress in my armor and ride away. A good enough ruse. And I watched Utad open the gates of Bibbenberg to Aethelstan. I watched him hand over Northumbria, in effect to Alfred's grandson, Edward's firstborn, his land and my own. Constantine had shifted uncomfortably, and Finan let Osrith's hand go, so that she could touch that of the former king of Alba. But mother got in, said young Finan, who was standing beside his father. I had been admitted by then, for Aethelstan's life advisor had recognized me as your ambassador, and we watched as mother got in by some means or another, and dropped down into the great hall, just like a spider, in front of Aethelstan, who was being hosted by young Utad, under his father's instructions. No doubt that was in the future, far in the future, when a desperate Edera had ridden to Bibbenberg to petition her mother to attend the dying former king of Alba. The army was indeed being admitted, the gates opened, and at the front, Aethelstan, with his banner and his nobles, rode in, guards scanning the horizon for the enemy. Osrith got from her horse and led it a mile towards the west. A silver piece if you will take my horse back to Berwick, she asked one of the farmer's sons, as she scanned the fore area of Bibbenberg. No more warriors yet. And Osrith watched as, after a few moments of the young man taking off at speed, warriors riding in his wake. The path that Osrith took long ago, to climb down to the beach and then up Th's walled steps that began in the tiny inlet from which he had left, all those years ago. Sigebright had stored silver in the boat, and she had rowed it all the way to Lindisfarne, the guards shooting arrows at her, one passing through her left hand. Osrith looked at her hand now as she reached the inlet, before inching up through the overgrown rocks. Above her, the gates were flung back open and riders left, the king, from what Osrith could tell, and Utad behind. Other riders came too, but Osrith could not, would not, contemplate whether Finan was with him. Her age should have precluded her assent, but angry determination was pushing Osrith on, until she reached the rafters, the roof of the chapel, and climbed up on top of it, sliding down onto the other side, and into the roof of the hall. What is happening? The light, tinkling words of Benedetta rung out around the hall. Guards surrounded her, one of which Osrith recognized. She pulled out buoy and dropped down in front of her. A woman screamed, and a guard stood in front of her, raising a blade. Osrith kicked it from his hand and stood before Benedetta. Lady of Bibbenberg. Osrith nodded, adrenaline coursing through body. She was angry. She was put out. This was her former home. How dare anyone oppose her? I am not the lady, Benedetta told Osrith with dignity. This is the lady. Osrith looked at the girl who had screamed, assessing her up and down critically with her eyes. Elswith, daughter of Ethelm the Younger, granddaughter of Ethelm the Senior, Osrith said. She was married to young Utad, and had given Utad 2 grandsons and a granddaughter, a bloodline for Bibbenberg. And she was as flighty and as silly as her aunt, Elflad, Edward's second wife. One day, maybe, she added, daring any of the guards to challenge her. Presently, I am standing before you all, their warrior queen of the Idings. In the absence of your lord, I have taken Bibbenberg back. She looked to Benedetta and then to Elswith. For a short time she took a step towards Benedetta, who said and did nothing. Utad, where is he? He is not here, came a voice from beside her. I was asking the lady, Osrith told the guard, her hand flicking to tagged Sikhs, and she looked around, deliberately, as if she really had taken over her old fortress home, assessing it, as if appraising it for improvement. Then, she looked to Benedetta. I know about the gold, about the feint, she added. It had been Ben who had told her that Utad and his son had been trying to fool Aethelstan into avoiding Bibbenberg lands. A scream came from the back of the room. The guards moved. A small figure was charging towards her, a blade in front of her, outstretched. Osrith let it get within a few feet of her before she whipped to one side and pushed the child's arm. The weapon skittered to the floor. The child, who are you? The child demanded to know, looking angrily at Osrith's triumphant disarming of her. The lady of Bibbenberg, Osrith told her. Temporarily. And you? Elena, the girl told her. Osrith smiled. Elena, she repeated. Beautiful. Yes, Elena told her. It means beautiful in another language. My father told me, once. She looked away, sadly. My father. Her voice trailed off. She was a slave, like me, Benedetta told her. Not like me, really. Lucky, that she was with a group of them. In London, when Utad took us back, she got lost from her father. Her mother is dead. Osrith gave the girl a pitying look, and then watched the girl give Osrith an astounded shriek. That's mine, she shouted to Osrith, angrily. It's mine. And she was leaning up towards Osrith's head. Osrith reached up to her hair and found her jewel, the one Eric had given to her. The one she had given to Elfkin, which he had returned to her. This is mine, Osrith told her. But could it be? Is your father a mercen? She asked Elena. A mercen guard, a commander. My mother was Cymric. Osrith felt her mouth fall open, and she offered the jewel to Elena. Your father is called Elfkin, and your mother was called Haf, she told the girl. I remember when your father was about to marry your mother, he told me, at Easter, when I rejoined my men. And she told Elena, and by extension, everyone at Bibbenberg, that she had once been Elfkin's commander, when she had been younger, and Elfkin had been a child. I never died. There was an invasion, from Wessex. My grandmother hid me and pretended I was dead. I wandered off and couldn't get back. There was a lot of us, children, and we wandered around together, looking after each other as best as we could. She glanced towards the kitchens. Others are here too. The Lord Utad was kind enough to give us work and keep us safe. She looked at Osrith accusingly. So, if you are of Mercia, why do you claim Bibbenberg? This was my home, once, Osrith replied, considering that the most sensible questions were coming from a young girl now wearing her jewel. My mother was married to its lord. My father was its former lord. The girl was confused. And Lord Utad? My brother. I had a brother, he died, Elena told her. Osrith felt her heart crinkle in sadness. If she saw Elfkin again, he could at least tell him. I had another, two others, Utad's older brother, who I never knew, and a half-brother. She leaned towards Elena. My mother was also Cymric. And she let the girl show her the hall, and the kitchen and the courtyard while, behind her, a commotion of voices between the guards and Benedetto and Elswith began, trying to sort out what was happening. Osrith supposed, the heart in her chest that she had steeled to coldness erupting with the unexpected happiness of finding Elfkin's daughter, not only alive and well, but strong and opinionated. How did you get in here? Elena asked, and Osrith drew her down into Bibbenberg's foundations, showing her the sea gate, where she had launched. Then Osrith held up her hand, showing Elena the scar. I escaped from my uncle, he would have me killed. I sailed far away. And you do not want to stay anymore? After this time? Elena asked. There are days I miss it, Osrith told her, showing her the way she had come, back up, through the chapel, over the roof, in through the hall ceiling. I wish I could stay here. Then you will, the little girl insisted. Osrith looked towards Lindisfarne. If I had, I would never have been a warrior. I knew I always wanted to be. That's me too. Elena's eyes shone. And I have to do something. I must do, not that I want to, Osrith told her, pointing down into the hall. She kissed the girl on one cheek and Elena clung to her, before letting her down the rope on which she had come, following shortly afterwards and standing before Benedetta and Elswith. Young Utad's wife at least had the wit this time not to scream. Beside her, many of the wives were gathered. They had been left behind, and most would not look at Osrith. Yet, one caught her eye. It was Elfberh, who had been kind to her in Wessex. Sick though he had competition, that was when she had been thought of as a boy. She smiled to Osrith, and she nodded to Elfberh, both women recognizing one another. I should speak to you, Benedetta nodded, when Elena was safely sitting at the table, eating from a plate of chicken and bread. They walked to the window, and Osrith glanced at the sea traffic, which was always a good deal these days, a mixture of sail in both directions. He wrote to you a letter, Benedetta told her, and handed it to Osrith. Your husband, she clarified, and Osrith opened the page, and stared at the letters. Finan could write. He had written down a poem which he had remembered for young Finan. But it was the first time Osrith had ever had a letter from him herself. It told her he loved her, and expected her to come to Bibbenberg. When she did, she should remain, and not to follow him. Osrith read it twice before folding it and pushing it inside her jerkin. To where? That was the question. If she didn't know, she couldn't follow him, and nowhere did it say. Seaster, Benedetta said, when Osrith mentioned this. A place called Seaster, to meet with the king. Aethelstan was at Seaster then, Osrith thought. The city which his aunt reinforced with wall and made into a bear to prevent temptation of yet more Norse from Irian. Perhaps Constantine should invite Mudarka, Flan's cousin's child, over to tell him how he was doing it, but following the path of his father was probably what was being the most effective. Yet, Constantine had chosen the opposite path, alliance rather than expulsion. It doesn't surprise me, Osrith said to Benedetta. It means my brother is using Domhnall's incursions into England to reinforce the armies in the west of Northumbria, as an excuse to eliminate Guthfrith, newly proclaimed king of Ofoic, and Eardred who had been put in charge of Caerligwylid. How do you know? Benedetto asked her, Elena coming alongside the young woman and taking her hand. Because it is what I would do. Use your enemies to fight one another. She shook her head and looked out of the hall window, to the North Sea. And to think, I could have been Queen of Cumbraland. And do what? Benedetta wanted to know. Leave them be. Osrith replied. But Constantine would not allow it. He would have had me married to Guthred. He and Domhnall. And now, he had used her as marriage bait for another alliance. Domhnall, the man who came here? Domhnall, Osrith said. The king before Constantine. The truest man I ever knew. Domhnall, is their Irish cousin. Irish? As Anlaf, the one who your brother wishes to kill? Benedetto asked. Does he? Osrith thought. Well, there's a thing. They are from the same place. Domhnall's family still rule in Ireland and have made something of an art of repelling the Norse. You refused to marry this ... Guthred? Osrith nodded. I fled to Utad, in Wessex. I despised him, though. And now, she knew she had no choice. For, inside Finan's letter another was folded. I head north, to Constantine. Benedetto asked. To my daughter. I rescued her mother from a fire. I could not save Thyra. Fire? Benedetta shuddered at the idea. A healer birthed the child. I nursed her and took her somewhere safe. And now Edra needs me. Edra needed her. She was close to her time, and she wanted Osrith to make it up with Constantine. In all her life, Osrith had never known Edra to be like this. She was the epitome of assuredness and self-confidence bordering on arrogance. Now, clearly her beloved Athair could not help her. Edra needed her, so Osrith was returning to her, not Constantine, not Domhnall. Finan must know she had been there for the letter to end up with his, and that Osrith would seek him there. And if that meant having to acquiesce to the notion of marriage to keep them safe, to keep Edra and her child safe, then, Osrith may have to consider the unpalatable. On the back of Edra's letter, Osrith had used some rock pigment to write her name. It was not in Anglish, or Gaelish, but one line drawn the length of the page, slashes and hatches appearing one or other sides of the line. It was Ogham, the ancient Pictish writing, which Edra adored, and which she had perfected in sending messages to Ildub, who indulged her childish fancy by leaving a trail of them around Dunnottar for her to find. Looking at Edra's letter again, she folded it back up and handed it to Benedetta. Be sure she gets this, Osrith insisted, waiting for the woman to nod. But Benedetta drew her close. Take good care, Osrith of Bibbenberg, war is close, and it comes from the north. Osrith nodded. Benedetta, with Berg and Elena beside her, accompanied Osrith to the gates of Bibbenberg, giving her one of the fortress's horses, onto which Osrith climbed, not before she had pulled Elena close and kissed her forehead, smoothing her hair with Eric's jewel in it. Then, Osrith looked north, to her own lands, and to where the Duide flowed. You tell him that I did this, for Edra, Osrith told Benedetta. Not for me, not for Constantine, but for his Danish sister's daughter. I will tell him, Benedetta assured her, a look of admiration flashing in her eyes for a moment. And tell him, I do not want this place, and I give it back to my brother. Utad would find it, as he had done in kind to her, on his chair, in the hall. More than a gesture, the laying of one of Bibbenberg's spears on it was a challenge that a wrong had to be righted, and shame would come to the man who ignored it. One encouragement of the mayor by her reigned, and Osrith turned north, with heavy heart and Beric in sight, leaving her former home and Elfkin's daughter behind her. 88,888,888. But she did not get very far. Ahead of her, a ribbon of men, riders carrying Ethelistan's banner, were riding north. Every so often a plume of smoke of a homestead destroyed by fire could be seen. Osrith stopped riding. He had promised to her. He had sworn. She turned to her former home and screamed, anger, fury pouring out of her. She was just about to encourage the horse on, as fast as she would go, when she noticed more men, coming from the west. More bastards, Osrith thought. Orvas. Her hand went to Buey and she glanced from Ethelistan's army to the separate contingent. Osrith, Lady of Beric. It is you. A voice called out to her, urgently. My land is being invaded. Osrith called back, waving Buey. We know. Called the men at the front of the small group, who had broken away and was riding tentatively towards her. And if you think I am just going to stop here, and watch, Edru is there, at Cael Iguilid, the man called to her. You must come with us. Us, Osrith repeated, standing firm, and spitting the word back. Eardred is still ealdorman there, is he not? A Saxon in a Briton city? He is dead, killed from an unwise attack on Owain's men of Strathclyde, he man called back. And, as he approached, Osrith felt her anger, her bitterness, fall away from her like a caterpillar cocoon. It was Finolai, Abbot Findle. They told us you had left your land. When I came to find you, Finolai told her, as Osrith let him walk his horse beside her. I set out a search for you. I do not know if I am surprised that you are here, or not surprised. Edru is close to her time? Osrith sought to ascertain, as Finolai told her that there was a great meeting of kings and lords at his city. What do you fear? Abbot Findle asked her. For Edra, she told him. Cael Iguilid is to be considered neutral ground, he told her, for all the participants at this meeting. So, Constantine would be the, possibly Domhnall. And if she went, would it be taken that by accepting she was the inheritor of her mother's land under Brehon law, that Brehon law meant she was no longer wife to Finan but to Domhnall? Yet, if she trusted anyone, she trusted Finolai. And then another figure appeared, just behind Abbot Findle. I know you, I think, she told the man, and he nodded his head to Osrith. I am Edwin, Hywel's eldest son. I oversee Gwynedd. He said the word oversee extremely carefully. In close consultation with Prince Sindlan. This was too much. Ethelistan was busy wasting her land, and Hywel, Ethelistan's sworn ally, was now, somehow, on the side of Constantine and, more staggeringly, of the side of the Henoled leader. You do not fight with Ethelistan? Osrith could not help but ask. We do not, Edwin agreed. My father sought audience with King Constantine when we were at Dumnota, which was to drive the Angles and the Saxons from this land and reclaim this country that we have lost. Edwin ap Hywel told her. Osrith glanced to Finolai, who nodded, soberly. And what do you need me for? The Old North is no longer mine to administer, she told Edwin, looking across to Finolai. Of course we need you, Edwin told her. You are Gwythelth. You gave up the land to your daughter but never your title. All we Britons need to be unanimous in our action. You are sought by Prince Sindlan. He will not do this alone for his people. You must speak for the Old North. He is insistent on it, as is Owain. Edwin emphasized. You represent Urien, and may well decide the course that we allies choose against our common enemy. The Anglish and Saxons? Osrith asked. But there was no need. It had been the ambition of every Briton, Gael, Pict, Norseman and Cymric ever since their closed conference on Elenvanin, at Edra and Anlaf's wedding. The Anglish and Saxons, Edwin told her. And they turned, heading west to Cael Iguilid.